Hello and welcome to a new video on Marshal politics. Today I'm going to continue talking about populist movements, not just on the right, but actually overall. And I'm going to go over how the establishment has continued to undermine these people, either by attacking Trump, who represents a larger right-wing populist movement, even though he's not, his policies as president haven't really been populist, but it's just about crushing a populist movement, which is a threat to elitist power. So basically, ever since Trump announced he was running for president in 2015, he ran on a lot of populist themes, and all this was masked by something else, which was the mainstream media portraying this as racist and xenophobic and evil, fascist, whatever. Really, overall, this was just an attempt to stop movements that threaten elitist power, threatens to overturn systems that overturn the system that benefits them the most. Now, as we've seen over these past couple of years, a lot of establishment Republican figures have left the Republican Party, like the neocons, such as Colin Powell, Max Boot, a couple others. And these people are just embraced by the mainstream media as like these saviors, and then stupid, brainwashed, centrist Democrats are just like, oh my god, they're such wonderful people. And even the populist left realizes this, and they just see this as a joke. You're like Colin Powell, for example, he's literally a war criminal. They're like, oh my god, you're so amazing, you left the Republican Party, you're such a hero. No. And it's really just ridiculous how the mainstream media attempts to do this. They push this narrative, oh, they're the responsible, moderate Republicans, and Trump Republicans are bad. This is all just a guise to mask populist movements and to denounce them as evil so they don't grow in size. And you can see this not even just with Trump, but other populist figures on the right and left, or people who speak about really basic issues facing regular Americans. Regularly, since Tucker Carlson's ratings had ballooned during the summer of last year, there were countless hit pieces on his show, calling him racist, xenophobic, and just evil person. And he's like the puppet of white supremacists or whatever. And it's just nonsense. And then you go on later, you also have hit pieces against Bernie Sanders. And it's not like they're talking about his social views, which I detest. They're talking about his economic views, which I actually mostly agree with. And that's really the main threat to them. It's not really social issues that really define politics. It's really American society. It's really economic issues. And the mainstream media has just continued to denounce populists on the left and right as just, they call them names. Like, for example, Bernie Sanders is hilarious on the left. They compare him to, like, oh, Trump likes him or whatever, which I find hilarious. And then they say, oh, he'll give the election to Blum, which is hilarious. To be honest, I think Bernie would have won against Trump, but that's a subject for another video, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, and there's even more hit pieces on Andrew Yang, for example, who actually said the true thing, which is that the life expectancy in rural America, which is predominantly white, has deteriorated over the past few decades. And just bringing up this issue in a CNN town hall, the CNN anchor's like, oh, sorry about that. And the CNN anchor just said, "Oh, what you care more about white rural Americans than uh, urban minorities." Ridiculous. And it's just sad attempts like these to denounce, because talking about these issues, it implicates their incompetence ruling American society. And these people in media are actively working for these people. And it's just so consistent with these attempts to silence any attempt to talk about real economic struggles in American society. Instead, they revert it to stupid things like this, as you can see on screen right here. Pelosi, rioters choose their whiteness over democracy. You divide They like to divide people by race because it really just redirects energy to where there really isn't a problem. The main issues in American society aren't racial or caused by any like major social issue. It's mostly economic. Like most people's struggles right now, as I'm speaking, January 19th, 2021, the day before Joe Biden's inaugurated. This is Most of their problems are economic. You have an economic depression. You basically have an economic depression right now. People are forced to stay home. There is a deadly virus out there. It's like things are terrible, and it's not. People aren't like concerned about like affirmative action right now, like or abortion even. Like that's not the top concern right now. Right now, our attention should be shifted to economic um, issues. That's the core issue here right now. And once we solve those problems, yeah, then we can talk about stuff like abortion, immigration, stuff like that. And there's even more examples of just completely ignoring the main issue. Here is another example. On CNN, this was a tweet. This had 4,600 likes when I took a screenshot of this. I think it has over 1,000 now, 5,000 now. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris shows personal stories with E.B. Phillip. CNN special report: Kamala Harris making history airs Sunday at 10 p.m. Eastern time. And it's just stuff like this. It's such a joke. No one cares about this. And then, luckily, people are smart in the comments. Let me find this. Here we go. I don't need personal stories. I need healthcare. Exactly. This is just... CNN is a big part of this centrist, neoliberal garbage that tries to enforce the status quo. And in this prior election, the 2020 election, both candidates were basically status quo. You're basically gonna get the same thing. To be honest, I don't think Biden will even be able to implement that many major policies as president. Maybe like maybe a medium-sized one in 2022. But other than that, I don't really see him being that effective as president. And even then, Kamala Harris is gonna eventually take over. She's not really gonna do anything. And even then, all the things that are gonna do are gonna be completely undermined. Because guess what? In 2024, there's still gonna be economic issues. And you know what's going to happen? People are going to elect an economic populist, and I'm hoping that person is Tucker Carlson. I'll speak that in the future, actually. But yeah. And there's more stuff like this. Personal stories during a pandemic with people suffering. This is why I hate CNN, and they're completely right. And then this moron says, I don't know if you noticed, but Kamala Harris is making history. A lot of people care about her. Like, you're such a joke. You're so stupid. You're exactly what they want you to be. You don't question anything. You don't look at the bigger picture. You just look at such a simplistic point of view, and you just run with it because you think it makes sense. In your small brain. Sorry. Yeah. And it's just so ridiculous. And really, a lot of these, and again, these are just attempts to sideline from real economic issues, and this is combined with their effort to silence populist people. And then there are actually regular people that don't like populist movements. They cite wonderful populist policies and they act like that's bad. Like really? Oh, Medicare for all. How terrible! Really? Regular giving health insurance to people is bad? Like regular people, it's bad? And there's tons of populist, so-called populist positions that the populist left supports, like canceling all student loan debt and stuff like that. When these aren't really populist issues, and they actually put a much larger burden on American taxpayers overall. And it doesn't really help anyone in the end because eventually there will always be student loan debt. After you eradicate student loan debt, what happens later? You're gonna look 10 years later, maybe it's probably almost gonna be at the same exact level in terms of how much money people owe in terms of student loan debt. And yeah, that's just one example of a left-wing populist position I don't agree with, but yeah. And as they attempt to silence populist movements, they promote this garbage. And it's just so ridiculous. And they call right-wing populist movements authoritarian and fascist, which is just so silly. And it's really ridiculous. And now the thing we have to realize is that it's not even just the mainstream media and the establishment in this country. It's also the Republican establishment in the Republican Party. And now these people are terrible. I don't think it takes that much of a deep thinker to realize that. But they really are our biggest problem. They're really they're the main obstacle in the way. Once our populist movement has crushed the establishment, power is going to be ours in 2022 and 2024. They don't even stand a chance. Left-wing populist movements aren't serious in the end. They're not very serious at all, actually. And their social issues would literally revert all the goodwill they intend with their economic positions. And it just doesn't lead to a stable American society supporting abortion, affirmative action, and increased immigration, which will literally ruin this country. That, in the end, really just hurts their original wish. And I think these people do have good intentions. That's why I actually get into serious debates with populist left people, because I actually do believe they have good intentions. But on this one issue I'm talking about with mainstream censure of populist movements, we should unite on this. And we should talk to the populist left, and we should unite on this issue and try to promote populist economic positions. And as I said, once we get rid of the Republican establishment and we get our nominee in 2024, then victory is ours. And all these, as I said, all this example of this person and all these attempts they make to basically distract Americans from real problems is such a big issue, because it really brainwashes certain people who just they're not that intelligent politically speaking, and they don't really understand all the issues. They look at things from a very simple point of view. Trump bad, regular Democrats good. They don't really understand anything, and it's just sad, actually, because we really, if you look at this year, 2021, where we are, we live in an age where it's so easy to obtain information, and it's just so sad people don't know the most basic things about American society. They don't understand basic issues. They're just so blinded, and I really hope that we can solve this problem in the future. And really, in the end, all these attempts to silence populist movements, they all fail in the end. Just like any attempt to silence or stop political movements, it always radicalizes people. For example, here at the end, doesn't really have to do with populism, but it has to do with really just white people overall. And this is just, again, another it's just distracting from the main point of populism. And they just talk about all these terrible white people that support populist movements in the Midwest. And it's just this guy, Mo Davis, who ran against Madison Cawthorn in the House race last fall. I was chief prosecutor at Guantanamo for over 2 years, and there's far more evidence of Congressman Madison Cawthorn's guilt than there was of guilt for 95+% of the detainees. It's time we start a domestic war on sedition by terrorists. Do I need to say this again? Really, in the end, this is just completely ruining their election chances. And I really hope in 2024, really hope that populist movements will win, because I can at least compete with the populist left and beat them on actual ideas. There's no winning with centrist garbage neoliberals because they don't believe in anything. You can't argue with them. You can't. How do you argue with someone who doesn't believe in anything? They believe in vague things like returning to normalcy or whatever the hell that means. And, making America a nation of immigrants again. Whatever. They run on these vague, broad themes that don't really mean anything at the end of the day. And people have been so exhausted by this political climate that they just accept it. And in the future, really need to focus on convincing these people to support the populist right. Because these are people that I don't think they necessarily have any strong political convictions, and they just supported Biden because, I want to live a normal life, and I think there were a lot of Biden supporters that believe this. And really, they're not getting anything normal at the end of the day. And we need to convince people that they're not. And I don't even think we need to convince them. They can just see what will happen during the Biden-Harris reign for the next couple of years. And yeah, it's just part of a much larger discussion about the establishment attempting to save its ass, shutting down populist voices and just acting like they're evil. They call them names, and they just completely distract from the real arguments that are going on. And it's such a problem, and it's such a shame that people actually believe this. And yeah, I think this is an important message for all right-wing populists to acknowledge. And at the end of this video, I will show some clips of attempts by the mainstream media to silence populist movements. But yeah, as I conclude this video, it's just a lot of these things are obvious. It doesn't take them much thinking to realize this. And it's that the political establishment is really worried about the rise of populist movements because, again, I hate saying this, but it's just so painfully obvious. It threatens their own political power. They don't want to lose power. Power is literally who they are. We need to stop these people. They've been destroying our country for decades already. These are the people that rose during the 90s, during this garbage neoliberal era. And they rose to basically just seize the American system and push their globalist policies. Not even just globalist policies, just fiscal conservatism, garbage, neocon nonsense, getting us into unnecessary wars in the Middle East, destabilizing the entire region, toppling regimes and causing massive instability in Iraq, in Libya. It's really it's disturbing how people can still support them. And we need to win over these regular people. These are people that are in the suburbs that wanted normalcy, and they voted for Biden. And is really concerning, because if we just lose these people and we don't convince them with like with actual populist positions, then we're done. We can't win. And we need to do this before until the Democrats really just take power and they allow 11 million illegal aliens to get citizenship, which means Republican will never win a national election possibly ever again. And it's such a problem, and we need to recognize this. Anyways, I'll show you some clips now.
Trump has really transformed the Republican Party out of all recognition. I mean, I say this as somebody who was a lifelong Republican until the day after the last election.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. What do you have to lose? You're living in poverty, your schools are no good, you have no jobs.
His racism, his nativism, his conspiracy mongering, his vendetta against science, all these tendencies are now what defines the Republican Party in a way did not prior to Trump's election. One of the most disturbing things we've seen in the last few years is that even as Trump has alienated most Americans, even as he has governed atrociously, as he's presiding over a set of catastrophes we have not seen in perhaps a century, nevertheless, he still holds the support of roughly 85-90% of the Republican Party. And a lot of the base, they're not holding their nose. They love the guy. He is exactly what they've always wanted. But already you're starting to see the jockeying for the post-Trumpian future of the Republican Party. And I think you're going to see a lot of people who are basically made in Trump's image or have remade themselves in Trump's image, like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley or Mike Pompeo. You're going to see some others who are somewhat more moderate, like Nikki Haley. But I think the greatest contrast is between really two of the extremes in the Republican Party. On the one hand, you have Larry Hogan, the moderate governor of Maryland, somebody who is pro-gun control, pro-choice on abortion, who took the coronavirus seriously, who's a real fiscal moderate, and just a very sane, sober, centrist kind of guy. And on the other side, you have Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is the #1 rated host on Fox News. He is watched by millions of people every single day.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson.
Why is Tucker so popular? Because he offers them more of what Trump does.
A moral obligation to admit the world's poor, they tell us, even if it makes our own country poorer and dirtier and more divided. The speech says, look, our civilization is superior and we need to defend it. What's wrong with saying that? Latin American countries are changing election outcomes here by forcing demographic change on this country. Their political success does not depend on good policies, but on demographic replacement, and they'll do anything to make sure it happens. This may be a lot of things, this moment we're living through, but it is definitely not about Black lives. And remember that when they come for you, and at this rate, they will.
The reality is a substantial portion of the Republican base, they love that. They really go for that. That's what they wanted all along. They've never been happy with candidates like Mitt Romney, John McCain, George W. Bush, who seemed like, very tapioca kind of moderate, responsible Republicans. And certainly Larry Hogan is even more of the same. And, now if I had to bet my money, I would say that Tucker Carlson is a much more likely Republican nominee in 2024 than Larry Hogan. And I think that tells you a lot about the state of the party today.
Washington, Constance, go ahead.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen a resurgence of white nationalist violence. As a survivor of the deadly car attack in Charlottesville, it is important to me that our next president addresses this issue immediately. Please explain how you will work to curtail this problem, and also please explain whether you will support a bill that defines white nationalist violence as terrorism.
Well, first, congratulations to you, Constance, for your incredible work. Let's give her a round of applause. And what you've been through. If the camera people permitted it, I would run out and give you a hug right now. I'm going to give you a hug in the next commercial break, because what you've been through sounds incredibly difficult and traumatic. So, to me, right now, this tribalism that's tearing our country apart, it's related to a dysfunctional economy. Because if you feel like you don't have a future and your kids don't have a future, and then someone comes up with this, for example, scapegoating immigrants or hateful ideologies, then you're much more subject to those. So by getting the economic boot off of people's throat, hopefully we can help alleviate this tribalism. I'm inspired by the work of Dia Khan, this filmmaker who engaged in something called anti-hate. And so right now, the temptation for many of us is just to condemn racism and hatred, which we should do because it has no place in our society. But then the next step after that is to actually convince the people that these hateful ideologies are incorrect. And that's more difficult, it's more painstaking, but over time, it's our best path forward to hopefully convince people that there is no place for hate in the United States of America.
Mr. Yang, you may know that white nationalists are supporting you online. They seem to have seized on some of your statements, which they say are proof that you are particularly concerned about white people. Why do you think they're drawn to your candidacy?
It's been a point of confusion because I don't look much like a white nationalist. The closest thing we could come up with for it was that I retweeted the New York Times saying that Americans are dying of opiates in record numbers, so much so that more people are dying than being born in various communities. And those communities were largely white communities in the Midwest and the South. So I've completely disavowed any of that support. I don't want the support of anyone who has any kind of agenda that's different than the agenda of this campaign. And our slogan is humanity first. We're trying to solve the problems and improve the lives for tens of millions of Americans.
In your book, you do say the group I worry about most is poor whites. Why are you most concerned about that group, poor whites?
Well, in the context of my book, I was suggesting, to Constance's point, how is this tribalism and violence going to manifest itself? And so the group I was most worried about was poor whites who felt like they had no future, and then that violence would emerge in large part because that group would become increasingly angry and distressed. And so that's the context of the book. But I am most concerned about that group in terms of the nationalism that Constance was describing.
I would have shown more clips, but I just didn't want this video to be too long. But as you can clearly see in these two clips, it's in the first video you have Max Boot, neocon, garbage, swamp, piece of shit who pushed for the war in Iraq, and he's continued to push for foreign wars. And he's on the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Zucker, of course. And the second video, which is CNN, of course, the centrist garbage Democratic establishment media network, they attempted to shut down Yang for even just mentioning actual problems in American society and somehow twisted as being racist or whatever. And this is a common theme, as I said before, with somehow diverting this to race or whatever. Now, there's a lot of things I disagree with Andrew Yang on, obviously. He's not really a populist, but he does talk about the real issues in American society. And, yeah, and I like that, actually. And he said, and it's perfectly true, of course. Life expectancy in rural white communities has gone down tremendously. You have more people dying than are being born. And of course, these people will be radicalized, or so-called radicalized. And this is just like a thing of saying, oh, they're gonna join populist movements. It's not about white supremacy. There really aren't that many large white supremacy movements in the United States. Suggesting so is really a joke. And you see in that first video as well, they also sort of allude to, oh, Tucker Carlson being so divisive, just playing those clips, and you're supposed to, like, instantly recognize, like, it's bad. And it's so hilarious that when I was watching the clips they showed from Tucker, I completely agreed with literally everything he said. But yeah, it's just such a joke. And all these attempts to really, we can't let these people silence us, and really just have to expand right-wing populist messaging. And we can easily outsmart the populist left. The populist left, they have, I'm not going to discuss it. But yeah, let's work on improving our own movement. Let's denounce garbage like this, and let's actually convince Americans with actual policy prescriptions rather repeating talking points over and over again, talking about whatever, culture war or whatever. When the real problem we have right now is an economic war, or a class war. And yeah, that's the main takeaway I want for you guys to take from this video. And well, have a good day.